Mariners broadcaster Aaron Goldsmith joins Colby and I to discuss the upcoming season and what his philosophy and approach to broadcasting is coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Friday, January 19th, 2024. This is Ty and Colby for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON, that's LOCKEDON, $20 off your first purchase. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. So, if you've been following Colby and I since pretty much the beginning, since the start of the Control the Zone days, you'll know that we've had a list of interview, I guess we'll call them targets. And at the top of that list, of course, is like Julio, naturally. Near the top of that list was also Jerry, before we were able to talk to Jerry last year. And today we got to check off another box with another top of the list guy. And that is Mariners broadcaster and Fox Sports broadcaster, Aaron Goldsmith. We've been wanting to talk to Aaron for quite some time. We love Aaron's work. We respect the absolute hell out of Aaron and the rest of the Mariners broadcast team. And we were able to have a very lengthy conversation with him, at least relative to how long our shows are normally. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. We talked a little bit about his philosophy and approach to broadcasting. We talked about this 2024 Mariners Ball Club and a whole lot more. I'm just going to shut up and get to the interview. So I hope you guys enjoy. We're now joined by Mariners and Fox Sports broadcaster Aaron Goldsmith. Aaron, thanks for taking the time out to chat with us today. Really appreciate it. How's it going?
Oh, it's great, man. Yeah, absolutely. Good to be with you guys.
How's the offseason treating you?
Man, it's an offseason like I've never had before. I'm almost full-time dad week after week, and it's exhausting. Like, I've never been more tired. I go to bed at 9 o'clock, 9:30 every night, and I was actually talking to my wife the other day. I said, what am I going to do when April rolls around? Like, the idea of staying up until 11 seems awful. So I'm going to have to flip the switch. But it's been great. A lot of family time. I've got 3 young kids. I've been coaching my 2 boys' basketball teams. Now, one of the boys is 4 years old. So I'm not coaching. I'm just herding and trying to corral. But it's been great. It's just been awesome. It's such a change of pace from the baseball season, as you guys can imagine. Just being home constantly and dinner every night and drop off line at school and all that stuff. So it's been a good change.
See a bunch of baseballs behind you. Got a nice collection there. What are we working with there? Autos, like just foul balls?
Yeah, I only have one foul ball. Actually, it's right here. This was from last August. Cal Raleigh hit a ball back up to the booth, and I dropped it. I've always had a dream of catching a foul ball. And I'm 0 for 2. This is my first opportunity in about a decade, actually. And so I snagged the ball and I gave it to Cal a little bit later. And I said, hey, you have to sign something on here that just roasts me mercilessly. Uh-huh. And so he said, Aaron, nice hands, feet, Cal Raleigh.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
So that's pretty solid. But when I'm like a moderate collector. And I knew when I kind of started years and years ago that the scope of just collecting baseball things is so grand. You'll be lost going in 100 different directions. And so I kind of narrowed my focus. Primarily, the only things that I seek are HOF signed baseballs. So Hall of Fame autograph balls. So the big display case behind me, I would say almost all of those are Hall of Fame signatures. There are some exceptions, like I've got a Felix Perfect Game signature in there. I've got a Don Larson World Series Perfect Game autograph ball, which is really cool. So they're either Hall of Fame signed balls or I would say like event-based or ceremonial type signed baseballs in that regard.
We got an Ichiro in there.
I do have an Ichiro further back. Have you seen Ichiro's autograph? You must have seen Ichiro's autograph.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like those things that you did in school where you put the pen into the hole of the contraption with all the like gears, and then you run it around in a circle. I mean, his signature is, for as meticulous as a guy as Ichiro is, his signature is just, I mean, it's a tornado.
Speaking of collecting things, Colby right now is in the midst of putting together a collection of, well, it's going to be hard for him to find all autograph cards, but he's trying to get cards of every single Jerry Dipoto acquisition.
Yeah.
So right now he's looking for a Justin DeFreitas, if you're wondering where he's at.
The first thing I thought of is, what are the most obscure guys here? Obviously.
We were talking about this right before you hopped in. Colby, did you say that you got a Jonathan Arrow?
I'd found a Jonathan Arrow card, not autographed, unfortunately.
Now, are these players on either side of the acquisition, or only the receiving end?
Just the players that he has acquired. I might go back later and do the players he's traded away, but yeah, I got to start somewhere.
Can I tell the latest bookmark that I've added to my Mariners folder or tab folder? I guess it's a folder. Jordan Schusterman of Cespedes Barbecue, right? Big Mariners guy.
Friend of the show.
You guys? Oh yeah, I'm sure. Are you aware that he keeps a spreadsheet of Jerry trades?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just the other day, I bookmarked it because I'm like, I'm gonna want this at some point, and so I just pulled it up. Do you have? I'm gonna start like low hanging fruit, but names that aren't completely buried.
Sure.
Do you have a James Pazos autograph?
Not yet.
No. Cole, you're working from the beginning, right? Like you're starting from
I'm going in order.
Yeah.
So I'm backfilling a lot of this. I just started it recently. So
now, are you actually attacking this in chronological order? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not it's just easier to just kind of follow it chronologically than try and remember like all the. So I just listed out and check mark, and all that stuff. So, it's.
What would actually be
a slow process.
A pretty fun autograph would be a Pat Venditti autograph.
Ooh,
that's a good one. Yeah,
I forgot he was a Mariner. Yeah,
that's a fun story. For obvious reasons.
That waiver deadline in general, you got to get an Archimedes Caminero.
Caminero, yeah, of course.
Was that also the Gamel deadline? Did they get Gamel that year? But the year after,
the 2016 August.
Can't remember. I think so. I think that was.
Boy, this is a great list. How many do you think you have so far?
Oh, it's in terms of just like autos.
Yeah.
Probably only about 10. It's fairly new. I've recently acquired the Nate Carnes and like Chris Iannetta. So, and
you got the Nori Aoki.
Right? Yeah, I got a Nori Aoki. Yep. So yeah, it's fairly new, and I kind of have to draw the line somewhere. Like today, I learned that the Mariners once signed a free agent called Steven LaRude, and I don't think I can track that card down. So I'm gonna have to start, major league signings and stuff like that. But
is it autographs on? Is it on anything, or is it just on cards, just on baseballs? What is it going to be?
Just on cards for now. And then if I can't find the auto, I'll take what I can get. But I would prefer it to be autoed. But yeah, Wade Miley is Jonathan Arrow, like that type of stuff. So I'm in 2016 right now and kind of trying to work towards more recent acquisition. I do have a Mitch Garver, for example.
You even got a Boog Powell.
Yep, I got a Boog Powell.
How deep this thing runs.
Yeah.
Hey, Joe Wieland.
Yep, he's on my list.
I call Joe Wieland's no-hitter in Double-A.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Joe and I have got some real history. He was a very short-lived Mariner.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Kivlahan.
Yep.
Ooh, could have been. Yeah. I mean, that was a tough loss, Kivlahan. All right, well, Godspeed on that.
Yeah. Thanks.
I honestly, I can't think of a more worthless journey to take.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
But I credit you for your ambition.
It's the middle of winter. I got to do something baseball related.
Yeah. We gotta keep the blood pumping. So speaking about this off season, it's been a interesting offseason for the Seattle Mariners. Let's talk a little bit about what Jerry and Justin have done, and just this front office in general have done this winter. A lot of turnover, a lot more turnover than I think really any of us expected at the major league level. A lot of guys going out, a lot of guys coming in. What do you think about all of it?
I agree. I did not see this type of churn to the Mariners roster. I think it's kind of obvious what has happened. And to their credit, it seems like they have been as creative as possible and have tried to really make the best of this situation, which has been they've had to streamline some things. The latest, I guess, maybe round of moves that kind of came in a flurry a little while ago at this point, with the two Mitches coming over and Garver and Haniger. I think when those happen, even a casual Mariner fan can look at that and say, okay, this makes the Mariners noticeably better and fills a need for both guys, right? You needed an outfielder in Haniger, and you needed basically an everyday DH in Garver. And to me, those are two of the biggest impactful bats that you could have gotten. I never would have thought that Mitch Haniger was coming back to the Mariners. But man, just personally, I'm really excited. I think Haniger is one of just the ultimate pros that I've ever been around. I've learned so much about hitting talking with Mitch, and he's not an easy guy to track down. He has such a meticulous routine every day. He's not one of these guys that you'll find just sitting at his locker scrolling Instagram. That's just not who he is. And I think having his presence in the clubhouse, not just in the lineup, but in the clubhouse as well. If I was a Jerry or a Justin or a Scott Service, I would want my guys being around a Mitch Haniger. And one thing I've always thought about Mitch is that whenever his career is over, he will file his retirement papers knowing that he did absolutely everything he could to maximize his ability. Like there's not that guy doesn't take a single shortcut, whether it's his diet, his sleep, what he does mentally to prepare for a game, certainly physically. There just aren't many like him in that regard. He's almost a little maniacal about it in a good way. So very excited about just having him around again, not to mention just the fun times that we all remember from like peak Mitch Haniger. The concern I have, one of the concerns I have, is that you have two of your biggest bats in Garver and Haniger who have a pretty obvious injury history, right? And if one of those guys is out of the lineup for a period of time, obviously that would be disappointing. If you have both of those guys out for a period of time, that will be hard to weather. It would be hard to weather for any team, not just the Mariners, based on what they mean to the club. So if you go back, right, remember the second to last year for Haniger when he played in what felt like almost every game. I thought Service managed Haniger brilliantly. He got a lot of DH days, right? If it was a day game after a night game, they got him off his feet. They got him out of right field. They DH'd him. And you're not going to be able to do that now because of Garver. That just won't be an option. And so obviously Haniger is a few years older now than he was that season. And he's had injuries the last 2 years since that season I referenced. So it's not a matter of him not preparing himself. Unfortunately, he's just been one of those guys that's been stung by the injury bug, and some of them are completely unavoidable. I mean, we all remember some of the bad ones he had in a Mariners uniform. So I'm when I see the lineup now with those two names in it, I certainly feel better about it. But I do worry about how can Scott weather the storm with two of his biggest bats, ones that he kind of has to monitor from a health standpoint.
Colby, you got anything for Goldie?
Yeah, Ty and I have talked a lot about how this team has kind of they've kind of removed some of the old guard in terms of, clubhouse leaders. You look at Paul Sewald, you look at Gino. and Mitch Haniger even last year. So do you think the reacquisition of Haniger is maybe not quite as much about the clubhouse, but a little bit more so than people think? Because you've not thrown out. You've gotten rid of a lot of guys who were vocal leaders in that clubhouse. Haniger comes in. He's certainly somebody who commands respect, and for all the reasons you talked about. So do you think that maybe played a role in the reacquisition?
I don't think there's any question that it adds to his value. I think from a very basic necessity standpoint, they had to have somebody like him, right? You needed to have a right-handed hitting corner outfielder, right fielder in this case. So he fits the most important thing. But you're right. I mean, J.P. Crawford has clearly emerged as one of the leaders. In fact, I've said this before. I don't think I've ever heard a player reference more by Scott Service applauding him for his makeup as I have Scott talking about J.P. Crawford. It's a somewhat regular event for Scott. He loves J.P. Crawford, the person, not just the player, and what he brings. And he references all the time how competitive he is. And he's not blowing smoke. I really think he firmly believes it. So between J.P., Haniger, I don't know how vocal of a guy Mitch Garver is, but he's certainly an established big league player who just signed a fairly lucrative free agent contract. So that is certainly a presence. But yes, you're right. They have lost a number of those guys. And I think every year you hope that some of your younger guys continue to evolve into that. And this will be year 3 for Julio. It's Julio's team, right? I mean, he's the face of it. How Julio evolves in terms of a vocal leader, I don't know. He certainly has that ability, and I do feel like he has done that before, but for some reason we don't maybe talk about Julio in that light quite as much because he's 23 now. But to be a leader requires, I imagine, a number of things, one of which is you have to have success, right? It's really hard to be a leader in the clubhouse when you are struggling to perform. And that has certainly not been an issue for Julio over his first 2 years. He is one of the faces of baseball, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if that takes maybe a noticeable step forward in some regard this year. So I do think they are fairly well positioned on that front, even despite the losses that you referenced, which are accurate.
Our conversation with Aaron Goldsmith will continue in just a moment, but first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. And with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. So forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON, that's LOCKEDON, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem promo code LOCKEDON, that's LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. We've been asked this quite a bit this offseason. I'm going to ask you, who do you think on this team is going to take a significant step forward in 2024?
By the way, to backtrack for just a second, I mean, you can throw Cal Raleigh in that bucket as well, right? Yeah. I mean, he's posted, he's gotten it done, and I think he has just an immense amount of respect within that clubhouse, especially with what he played through 2 years ago on the back half of the season. One guy who, if you told me the season ends and he has 25 home runs, and if you told me his name is Dominic Canzone, I would say, yeah, I believe that. Like, I'll be curious how many lefties is he facing, right? Because he looked bad. He had some bad swings left on left. But I'll tell you this much. Even though he had some bad swings, I'll go glass half full on something for a moment with Canzone.
Please.
He's not afraid to look bad. You know, it's like the guy in high school who doesn't want to get dunked on. You know, it's like you don't want posterized. I'm not saying that Canzone looked that often. But there were some tough matchups left on left as a rookie that he just got fooled. And we saw Kelnick get fooled many, many times, right, as a very young player. And even through his probably final at-bats at times as a Mariner. But the amount of power that Canzone has, I had no idea. And you look at him and you would have no idea. But that kid will let it rip.
The home run against the Orioles was very shocking.
Incredible.
I think it's a very good way to put it.
He has the ability to find the barrel. And it gets loud when he gets to it. And even, I mean, if for people listening who remember the series in Arizona before the trade, I mean, Canzone had some big knocks against the Mariners.
Yep.
Off some of the big boys in their bullpen, including Munoz. I feel like there was a go-ahead ribby,
up the middle,
8th or 9th inning that won the game for the Diamondbacks. It was Canzone. So I guess he's a young player. You never know what that type of development is going to look like. I also don't know what he will look like specifically against lefties, but I know this much: when he gets to the ball, it's loud. And when that trade was made, I think we were all in the same boat. Like, we just saw Canzone with the Diamondbacks. He had a couple of big hits, but he wasn't this high draft pick. He wasn't a super mega prospect. Physically, he doesn't jump off the page to you. He's not this imposing guy. But you watch him play day after day, and you're like, man, okay, like, this kid's got some sneaky pop, and he can find the barrel. So I would say that's the guy that I would buy some stock in right now, that I'm curious to see what will his numbers be like at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think Canzone's definitely going to be a popular one for that. Even throw in Ty France into the mix. Luis Urias, I think, definitely fits that bill as well. There's a lot of guys where it's like they're either coming off of down years or injury plague seasons, or you just haven't seen a lot of it. There's very small sample size, but the upside is undeniable with a lot of these guys. And again, that's even for someone that's a bit more established, like Ty France, who's coming off of a down last year and a half essentially. I think the ceiling for this team is very high, but there's a lot of variables as well to account for. Like, also like you talked about earlier with the health of Garver and Haniger, but it's the upside definitely is very exciting with this team. When I set this interview up with you, I told you that I also kind of wanted to dive into your philosophy and your approach to doing broadcasts, and I think a really good place to start here, because a lot of commentators, a lot of play-by-play guys, they're not particularly good at this, and that's the art of calling big moments. So I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts on how to word things in a big moment, how to really meet the moment, and then a very important part too is letting the crowd be the star as well.
Well, nobody wants. Let me rephrase that. Every broadcaster craves the big moment, right? Like, you show up at the ballpark 162 times, and you just hope that the game gets decided in the final at bat. I mean, that's what you want every game, because you want to be able to have the most exciting plays when you're behind the microphone. That's way more fun. I think when I first started with the Mariners, this will be my 12th year with the M's. I was so nervous and so tight and so afraid, truly just so afraid, saying the wrong thing. It was by far my biggest weak point. Like, if you had a scouting report of me my first few years, and some people might still think it's my biggest weakness, to each their own. But it's funny. Somebody tweeted me, and it was not a great tweet. Like, it was not a, hey, way to go.
Oh, no.
But they said something along the lines of, your home run calls or your big calls, they don't have enough salt. And maybe it's because I like to eat a lot. I don't know, but it really resonated with me, and I knew they were right. I knew they were right. I couldn't dispute it at all. And because every big call I had was just, hey, don't mess it up.
Right.
Just say as little as you can, get out, and don't mess it up. And I do think there's a fine line. You want to amplify the moment. You want to live up to the moment, meet the moment, but you don't want to overshadow the moment. You don't want to take the moment and use it as your pedestal for you to be the focal point. So there is a bit of a fine line there. And I guess in some ways, to be fair to myself, the only way to figure it out is to do it and to be aware of that. And it took me some time. And I remember when I started calling college basketball, you sit courtside calling college basketball. You're right there on top of the action. And for whatever the reason, I really allowed myself to kind of loosen up a little bit calling basketball. I can't explain why. And
do you think that's maybe because it wasn't like your main gig? So there's like less pressure, maybe?
It's funny. I do feel like I think there is some element to that. When I started calling games for the Mariners, it's my first major league job. I'd come out of the minors. I kind of felt like there was this every night when I started broadcasting, I felt like there was this collective fan base, right? And they're all listening to me, and they're all judging me, and they're all deciding whether they like this new guy or they don't, or what they like about him and what they don't. And it was like every night you've got the same jury, right? And when I would go call college basketball games for Fox during the winter, especially those early years, I was like, no, the jury's different every night. If I make a mistake tonight and then next Thursday I go to Eugene and I call a game, they don't know that I messed up that call in Berkeley last Friday night. Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess I maybe felt like I could just let it loose, let it rip a little bit more, and things weren't going to stay with me. Now, I say all this was in my head, right? I'm sure there were some Mariner fans who were doing the things that I described of who is this guy. But for the most part, this is all in my own head and all my own making, and I was my own worst enemy when it came to this. But basketball allowed me to kind of find that next gear and hear what that sounded like, experience what that feels like. And then as I became more comfortable as a Mariner broadcaster, which admittedly, it's not like I could just flip the switch in year 2. I mean, it took like 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. Now it's to a point where it's the complete reversal of what I was just describing. When I do very few network games now compared to a number of years ago, but when I do go call a Fox game, and part of the reason why I did reduce my Fox schedule, I feel no investment. I feel no investment with the teams. I feel no investment with the listeners, the audience, the fan base. And I don't like that, especially the audience standpoint. One of my favorite things about calling Mariner games is that, again, this is kind of made up in my head, but I feel like every night when I put the headset on, I'm talking to the exact same people that I talked to last night and the month before that, the year before that, and 3 years before that. And I feel like they know me, and I feel like I know them. Mm-hmm. In reality, we all know I don't know hardly any of them, and like they do kind of know me. They certainly know me more than I know them, but I feel it. Like I feel the connection, and whatever inside jokes I might have with Blowers or Dan Wilson or whoever it might be, or Gary, I feel like people are caught up on that, right? Mm-hmm. And like we're all in this together every year, and it puts me at ease. It makes me comfortable. More than that, I just really enjoy it. And it makes me want to show up to work to talk to these same people every night. So as I became more comfortable with that, I did create the ability to kind of turn it on more. And honestly, I remember my old boss, Randy Adamak, who is like one of the OG Mariners. Like the new press box at T-Mobile Park is named after Randy. I once a year I thank him from the bottom of my heart. He hired me, and if it wasn't for Randy, I could still be kicking it in Pawtucket, Rhode Island right now. I'm so grateful to Randy. I remember talking to Randy around year 5 or so with the Mariners and being like, "Hey, I feel like I'm too comfortable now." Like I had some calls that really, I like to think of it like your dashboard on your car with whatever that speedometer is that shows you how much you're revving your engine, right? Like there are times where you need to get excited, but if you start to redline, it hurts your car. And if you start to redline on the air, it hurts the call. And I've experienced that. And I that's not just something that I experienced 5 years ago. I experienced that a number of times last year, and I'll probably experience it a couple of times in 2024. But hopefully now I can hear it, recognize it, and adjust from it, because the big calls are the greatest and we all want them, but doing them right does take living in the moment, not being afraid, like not being afraid to just go with what you see and go with what you feel. And I try to always remind myself that if I'm feeling it, whatever it is, you on your couch are feeling the same thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that took me some time to get the courage to just instantly pull the trigger on that every time I had that feeling.
Right.
Because there's part of you just don't want to make a mistake. Right. You don't want to be called out on Twitter. You don't want people clipping this call and putting it all over the place and you feel like an idiot. But I do feel like some of that is the cost of doing business, right? Like if you want to really live in the moment, like you probably are going to mess some of those things up every once in a while. Hopefully they're not catastrophic.
Well, I mean, you're on live TV, you're on live radio like 162 times a year, if not more.
Right. Like it will happen. And I try to cut myself a little slack as long as it's not like egregiously horrible.
Right.
But I remember last year, Ty France hit a homer out to left and it knocked a light out of the scoreboard. And when the ball was hit, like I had a pretty good sense it was a home run. And when it kind of gets hit over to left field, like left center, I will oftentimes go to my monitor if I'm on TV or even if I'm on radio, because I want to see specifically where it hit. Like, did it hit off? We've seen home runs hit off the stairwell that go up from the pen, right, up to the main concourse. Like, did it land? Did a reliever catch it in the bullpen? Right? Did it land beyond the bullpen and into the pen? And so I was looking at my monitor when the ball was like halfway out to the fence. And then I saw on my monitor one of the lights go out on the scoreboard. And I couldn't see the ball. Right? I can't see the ball on the monitor, but I saw the light go out like instantly in the area where I thought the ball would be. And then our director cut to, Ty France rounding second base. And so, but in that moment, in the call, I referenced that he just knocked the light out of the scoreboard. And it was like, I didn't even think about it. I saw it. I said it. And then when I laid out, I remember thinking, oh man, I hope I saw that right. But he did. He did. He knocked the light out of the scoreboard. And to me, like, that was such a cool thing. It never happens. And to not get that in the call would have been a real bummer. I can't remember the last time a guy knocked the light out of the scoreboard at T-Mobile Park, right? And so I rolled the dice, basically. I assumed, how else could this happen? Now, people could listen to this and say, well, Aaron, like, of course it was the home run. Like, do you think that the light just went out at the exact same time that Ty France hit a home run in that vicinity? And when you look at it that way, from like wherever you are listening to this right now, in your car or on your couch, like, yeah. But when you're in it and you're calling it and there's 40,000 people screaming because they just know the ball went over the fence and like your adrenaline's pumping, like you don't have the time. You can't think that way. It's just, you're just reading and reacting. And so when that happened, it was like such a minor thing that nobody even probably thought about or realized. But I remember thinking once I confirmed that the ball did hit the scoreboard and knock the light out, I was like, all right. I'm like, that I wouldn't have been able to do that a few years ago because I wouldn't have had the courage to be in the moment, watch the ball, see what happened, work that into the call, be genuinely enthused, excited, like anybody at home. Like, oh my gosh, did you just see that? He just knocked the scoreboard out. And fortunately, I was right. And you know what? In 2024, something like that's going to happen, and I'm going to be wrong, and I'm going to be really mad driving home, and then everybody's going to forget about it.
Yeah.
But the good news is, like, I've been able to start to train myself that hopefully I'll cash in on more of those that I'll miss. Like that's the fun, right? Is when spontaneous things like that happen that you cannot plan for, nobody can predict. And when you're in it, man, like you're in it and you see it and you call it, and it's like no other call you've ever had because it's like no other home run you've ever seen. That's the fun. That's the really fun stuff.
Yeah, I feel like Dave Sims is pretty good at just seeing it, calling it, and sometimes he gets stuff wrong, but you know his home run call, his like big moment calls, they're almost always money. So
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, talking about
you just gotta let it fly.
Yeah, talking about meeting the moment, like Simsey's got an 80 grade fastball.
Absolutely.
And not even talking about the the Mitch game a couple years back against the Angels, or
Great call,
the Raleigh walk off. Yeah, I mean, great. But like even I remember just during the summer when they swept the Royals at home, and the sweep clincher in the ninth inning when Munoz is out there, and just the way that he's like matching the energy of the crowd was electric. It's just like Simsey's really good at that stuff.
He is. He's masterful at it, and it's been wonderful the last few years in particular. You asked earlier about the crowd, and we've had, for some of these games, we've had just remarkable crowds, right? 35 plus, 40 plus, and you obviously feel that, you hear it in your headset, and when you get big moments with big crowds at home, it's such a joy to call the moment and then lay out and let that take over, because it's, first of all, you can't fight it. If you fight it, you'll lose. They're louder than we are. And it's just, you do this so that you can have big moments at big crowd in front of big crowds, hopefully in your home ballpark. Right. And so when you sense it, it's an easy trigger to know, like, all right, it's time to wrap it up and get out and let the crowd take over, because that's the best sound in sports. There's no doubt.
We'll pick up our discussion with Aaron in just a moment, but first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. All right, Sailors, the NFL regular season may be over, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. And the app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can also find bets in the new Explore tab and make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. It's the best way to find popular parlays. While the Seahawks are done, Mariners baseball is almost here, folks. So is betting on Mariners baseball. But while you wait for the boys to take the field, you can still bet on the Kraken and Huskies basketball. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn, that's LOCKEDON, and make your first bet a layup. Again, that is FanDuel.com/LockedOn, LOCKEDON. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League.
So we're talking about some other guys in the booth too. So this is a question I really want to get out there, so I want to make sure we get it in here. What's it going to take for Rick Riz to be a Seattle Mariners Hall of Famer? Like, what's the holdup?
You know what? It's so funny you bring that up. I was actually driving around today, and I thought that's got to happen soon, right? I don't have. I'll preface this by saying I have no inside information. Like I know as much as you guys do, but I feel like if that was announced tomorrow,
yeah,
I would be like, yeah, okay, great, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It can't come soon enough. Absolutely.
So I've talked to Gary Hill about this. I've asked him about this. And, spring training's coming up, and from the outside looking in, I feel like this is one of the more underrated, like hardest parts of the entire year for you guys, and that's keeping listeners engaged in the late innings of like a spring training broadcast, right? When like guys with numbers in the 80s are coming out there, no name on the back of the jersey, sometimes they're not even on your program. Like, how do you specifically from your standpoint try and keep listeners engaged during the spring? And is that something that you plan ahead of time? Do you plan maybe some stories or some talking points, or do you just kind of vibe out essentially?
I would take your point even a step further and say innings 1 through 9 are the most difficult part of the broadcast year. I mean, it's really hard calling 30 games that don't have consequence to wins and losses, to the record, to the standings, right? Like, calling one of those games would be hard enough. Calling a month's worth is very challenging, especially since really all those games are the same, right? Like, the lineups are pretty much the same. The same guys come in at the same point for the other same guys. It's a lot of Groundhog Day. So it's very difficult. I think there's, I suppose, 2 methods to go about doing it. One, I'll take Luke Raley, for example. So we had him on our Hot Stove show the other day. And to get ready for the interview, I did just a deep dive research on all things about him, right? And from the basic stuff like his numbers from last year to the more interesting biography things like his family owns a Christmas tree farm. Yeah, exactly, right? Which is Rayleigh's Tree Farms. They grow and sell pine and spruce trees in bulk to landscapers. And during December, they sell over 1,000 Christmas trees.
Wow.
And Luke grew up strapping Christmas trees to people's cars just like you and me, right? And so when Luke comes up in spring training, I can talk about these things. But what I've also learned is that even when he's out of the game and it's the 8th inning, like, you don't care that he's out of the game. A good story is a good story, and especially in spring training. I mean, any good story is worth its weight in gold in spring training. And so I have learned to get prepared this time of year so that you're not scrambling when you get down to Peoria. Get your notes in order. Hopefully they're more than just he hit this many home runs and stole this many bases, because nobody really cares about that. And it's good to reference, but people want to actually feel like they get to know these guys a little bit and realize that they're actual real people. So that's one element of it. And then the other is spring training really teaches you to take your blinders off, because in a regular season game, as long as the game's within about 4 runs, it's like you kind of got to stick with the game, especially if you start to get men on base and the leverage starts to ramp up. But if you're playing the Dodgers in Glendale in mid-March and it's the 6th inning and all the starters are out, and maybe the starters are still in for all that matter, like, there's no problem with talking about how the Mariners played at Dodger Stadium on Jackie Robinson Day years ago, and how we got to interview Vin Scully, talk about Jackie Robinson and what that was like to walk into Vin Scully's booth at Dodger Stadium, shake his hand, and hear him say the name Jackie Robinson. It's amazing, right?
Like butter.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like, all you need is a connection of Mariners, Dodgers, Vin Scully, Jackie Robinson Day. Boom. Like, you're there. It's 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? And I think one of the most important things that I've had to learn the hard way is you always have to put the listener first. What does the listener want to hear? Does the listener really want to hear that right now some 23-year-old lefty who spent last year in Double-A Chattanooga for the Dodgers with this record and a this ERA is pitching. Nobody cares, man. Nobody listening to our broadcast cares about that unless I give them a reason to care about this guy. Right? Now, maybe I happen to know that this lefty who spent last year in Chattanooga has A, B, and C, which instantly makes him interesting to you, the baseball fan, whatever it might be, on the field, off the field. But if I don't know that, it's like, give me something that's interesting. Give me something I can sink my teeth into. And the Scully Jackie Robinson thing is complete low-hanging fruit that anybody driving around listening to that game gets teleported. And you got nothing but warm and fuzzies hearing about Scully and Jackie, right? And so, but it's hard. It sounds easy, but when you're the job is so repetitive, the games are so repetitive, not just spring training, but it's 9 innings every day and every night, that it can become really easy to put blinders on and not realize, hey, I'm in full control here. Like I'm the conductor. And if I'm bored, 100% chance you, the listener, is bored.
Right.
And so how about I start talking about something that brings me joy, that I find interesting, and I guarantee that you will probably find it interesting.
Right.
At heart, I'm a baseball fan. I listen to games. I watch games when I'm not calling them. And I know when it's like, oh, man, this is kind of dragging. And I know when it's like, oh, man, this is fun. Like this is I'm either learning something that's baseball-y, right? Or I'm learning something that's a fun story, or I'm just being entertained. Like two guys are just goofing around in the back half of a spring game, and it's fun. And that's part of it too. This is entertainment at its absolute core, bottom line. So by no means am I a master of it, but I've been through enough spring training games that I've been able to realize, hey, I'm boring myself to tears here, and we got to get this thing. We got to get this thing on track. Let's start thinking.
Yeah.
Which makes it more fun for me and hopefully more fun for you guys as well.
So I want to take it back about 15-ish months ago. Game 2, AL wildcard in Toronto. I ask everyone that I know is there about this that I get on the show because I was there. I live in Toronto. And I met Gary before the game, and he was kind enough to take some time to talk to me and my friend just a little bit about the game. And none of us had any idea what was going to happen that day. And there's that video from in the booth of Riz making the call of Adam Frazier's double, and you can see you and Gary in the background, and you're like punching Gary basically. It's hilarious. I wanted to ask you, what do you remember most about that day or that night, that celebration? And secondly, because Gary kept a beer can. I don't know if you know this, but Gary kept a beer can from that night. Did you keep anything from that night?
Yes, I have the same. I have the same Blue Jays Budweiser can.
There we go. There it is. Yep.
And then we also, we stayed on air for a long time after that game, and all the guys were doing their clubhouse celebration, and they were on the field. And by the time we got off the air, the Rogers Center was empty. Most guys were showered and gone. I remember I poked my head inside the clubhouse, and as I turned the corner, Cal Raleigh was there. And you remember he had the severe thumb ligament injury, right? He had looked like the equivalent of a boxing glove with ice underneath it taped onto his hand, man. And
warrior.
Yeah,
absolute dog.
It's like my takeaway from that moment that I obviously still vividly remember is I'm around these guys every day. I see them. I don't ever really see the guys after the game. I see them before the game all the time in various facets, at their locker, in the cage, on the field. And even I, around them as much as I am, like, you just don't realize what they put their bodies through to do this every single day. with hardly any breaks for 6 months. He is a warrior, man. Like that guy he's an animal. So I remember that, a little behind the scenes thing. And also we were able to snag a champagne bottle.
Oh, there we go.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
And before that, we snagged the clinched champagne bottle with the Cal Raleigh signature.
That's so awesome.
Autograph, thanks to his obviously iconic home run.
Yep.
So, yeah, it was really strange, to be honest, because the way that we split up the broadcast for the postseason, Rick called every game, and then Dave and I alternated games.
Mm.
And so I had game 1. Dave thus had game 2. And it was just so strange rolling into Rogers Center just like anybody else.
Yeah.
I wasn't podcasting that day. And so fortunately, the way that the booth was set up, I sat next to Gary the whole time. So we're having our own conversation about the game as it's going on. And we could see over Rick and Blow and Dave in the front row. We could see the field pretty well. And we could also see a monitor. So I just remember just watching the game like almost any other fan, which was just so strange. Like, I don't know if I've ever done that before, in a booth, no less, a Mariners game at least. But that was a really special night. You just assumed you were going to go back for game 3 the next day. I remember back at the hotel, we had a huge celebration for everybody in the traveling party. And it was really cool hearing Scott Service talk to the whole team and their families and literally everyone, hearing Jerry do the same thing. I remember thinking the same thing I thought when I saw them clinch the wild card at home and they had the shirt, the champagne, and they're taking the pictures on the field and from the mound. I remember thinking, this is what I see every other team do.
Yeah.
I've never seen the Mariners do this before. Yeah. This is so surreal. And it was the same thing that night in the hotel when the whole traveling party was there, hearing the manager address the team and give basically an attaboy and a pep talk of, we still got more to do. We still have more to accomplish. And hearing Jerry talk. I mean, it's like, oh, yeah, I've heard other guys say this, but never the guys that I cover.
Yeah.
And it was surreal. It was special. It made you just really grateful for your opportunity in life to be able to be there and kind of be behind the scenes and just eat some chicken fingers in the back row and soak it all in, man.
Those Rogers Center chicken fingers. Yeah. That whole night was, I mean, it's still surreal. Like every time I go by the Rogers Center, I get chills, quite frankly. Like it all those memories of that night come flooding back. I mean, again, like you said, like we were pretty much preparing for game 3. I'm looking at tickets. I remember everyone else in my section was looking at tickets for game 3. And, you remember the Ravi, those chants going on and all that. I was in hell. It was awful. And game 1 was such a breeze, right? Because like Castillo just shoved. They started things out so well with the Cal home run and the Gino RBI. They're up like 3-0. They just cruise. I'm like, man, this is the playoffs. This is sweet. Like, and then the next day, hard dose of reality. Teoscar Hernandez, the 2 home runs, all that. But man, just an insane game. And then couldn't like properly celebrate it when they tied things up because I don't know if you remember, but George Springer and Bo Bichette collided.
The amazing thing about that injury is it gave the Mariners time to get Munoz warm.
Yeah.
Munoz, now he really, if you remember, he really struggled. Yeah. I mean, he was clearly tired. But if you're Scott, you want to go to Munoz there. But how much time Springer needed allowed Scott to call the bullpen and say, get Munoz up now. And who knows? Obviously, thankfully, Springer was okay. Nobody wants to see that happen to him. But if not for that catastrophe, who knows, right? I mean, who knows? It completely changed the strategy of the game and the personnel of the game as a result.
Goldie, we've gone well over time. I really appreciate you being here and sticking with us. Colby, do you have anything you want to ask Goldie here before we get out of here?
I mean, no, thanks for bringing up the game 2 again, though. That never gets old.
It will never get old for me.
Home run, though. I understand it. So
yeah. You also had to sit through 18 innings of game 3 at the ALDS.
Game 3. So yeah, appreciate that. But no, man, just thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it. You've been really high on our list of interview targets for a long time. And last winter we got Jerry, so this winter we get you. And it's greatly appreciated. The Mariners broadcast team as a whole is just fantastic. And so it's always cool when we can get somebody like you or Gary to hop on the pod. So I appreciate it.
Hey guys, it's my pleasure. Thanks for all you do. I'm sure a lot of Mariners fans really appreciate it. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Aaron. Appreciate it. Thank you again to Aaron for being so generous with his time. Really appreciate it. Really had a fun time with this conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. That's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day and a beautiful baseball weekend, and we'll see you next time. Peace.